I think, as a CEO of the city of a company, you need to make sure that your customers are getting the most for their money. Right. So I think that's something where that's where crime maybe ties in. You're paying your taxes for a police department, a fire department, right, potholes or whatever. You got to make sure that money that your customers, so to speak, right, are getting the most for their taxes. And maybe that's what people are seeing right now is they're paying a lot of money, and I don't think they're happy with what their taxes are getting them.
And good morning. It's a beautiful Sunday morning out there. Hope you can get out and enjoy it. Thanks again to Scott Lang for coming by. And I'm sure we'll have people with different opinions than his on during the week as well here on the radio. Now, joining us here in the studio is the Standard Times reporter Mike Bonner. Thanks for coming in, Mike.
Oh, sure. Anytime.
Nice to have you in. So we couple of reasons I want to have you in. You've been doing a great job with this Carlos Rafael story, so we're going to talk about that. But it makes sense right now to just follow up a little bit with what we're talking about here with a 4-year term. Fantastic article today.
Thank you.
You got a chance to talk to all of the past recent...
last 5 mayors. Good round, well, not round number, but I guess good number, 5, 10, 15. So we went with 5, the last 5, and polled them what they thought of the 4-year term. Because you're relatively new to New Bedford. You've been here, what, a year, right? 8 months now.
8 months, okay. Formerly, you're a Massachusetts guy, but formerly from down south covering sports, right?
All over the place, yeah. I've lived in Mississippi, Iowa, New York, so...
Fantastic.
All over.
What did you learn about the city in this 4-year thing that you maybe didn't know?
I was surprised at the number of mayors that came out against it. I didn't... Going in, I knew Scott Lang was against it, and I was just guessing that he may have been the only person. But then when you speak to Tierney and Bullard, and they brought up good points. I was actually surprised at how, as I think you were talking to Scott Lang before, people on both sides bringing really good arguments to the table. Right. And just when you think you're like, yeah, you know what, the 4 years sounds good, you hear Scott say something, you're like, oh, 2 years sounds good. So it was interesting. I didn't realize that New Bedford at one point had a 1-year election term. So that was something I learned. And they doubled it about 100 years ago. And I also learned that in the long run, this really may not matter a whole lot because a lot of mayors, I think the average is about 6 years. Right. So maybe then the average bumps to 8 years. I don't know, which is then 2 more years of a person in office. But I think that was the interesting aspect when you look at terms for going from 1-year terms, and then the average being about 6 to last, since World War II. And when you think about if it goes to 4, then you're looking at probably an average of 8 years because two election campaigns.
Right. I will tell you, too, I didn't realize that Mayor Rosemary Tierney and Mayor John Bullard were against it either. Yeah. So I learned it was again, folks, I encourage you to go online or pick up the paper today and take a look at the article on the 4-year term that Mike Bonner has written, because I learned a lot about it as well. And it's interesting. People on the who are in favor of this, generally I probably would agree with them on 90% of the things. Christian Farland, businessman in town, grew up here his whole life, invested in the community. Victor Pinheiro, another one, former city councilor. But then you listen to Scott Lang, for instance, or Mayor Bullard was pretty good. I think you captured him pretty well in your article about his opinions on this.
Yeah, I think the thing that surprised me most about the article, and I said this to a number of my editors, was the people in favor for it made sound arguments. A lot of them were hypothetical in terms of businesses prefer 4 years. It's just better. In terms like that, it's just better. Where, as you mentioned, Bullard and Lang and even Tierney came out very strong against it. It wasn't wishy-washy. No. In fact, Rick Kidder and who else? A couple of people. They were saying, "Hey, this isn't life or death. We're here. We think it's better. We think it'll improve the city. We like the conversation." Where Scott Lang and Bullard were very much against it, saying, "You can't do this. This is extremely bad." So that was what was interesting to me. That the people in favor for it weren't necessarily saying this is a necessity. This needs to happen. Do it now. Where the people against it were very much like, "Can't do it now."
Right. No, I agree with you. And quite frankly, I just as a political nerd, I love the discussion. I love the discussion. I wish maybe we'd all started this a while ago, but there's other things going on. So again, pick up the Standard Times today. Take a look at this article. It's in depth and important. Let's talk about Carlos Raphael. You've been on top of the story since day one, and I've told you that off the air. I think you've really owned the story in many ways. It's been a long slog, right?
Yeah, 8 months. Yeah, because that was one of my first stories that I wrote. I think that the trial was postponed. I think my first or second week. So it's really been my beat, so to speak. And there's no person I've written more about here than Carlos Raphael. He's still probably second to Dak Prescott. When I was in Mississippi, Dak still has that title.
Okay.
But Carlos is coming up close. I mean, it's very close. So yeah, it's been turn after turn after turn, and speaking with a lot of people, there's going to be a lot more turns too. It's still not. It's close, but I don't want to say it's that close. Mm-hmm. If you're running the marathon, which it seems like it is, you're probably at Heartbreak Hill right now, but there's still, still a long way to go. You're not there yet.
Right.
So, yeah.
And it's all important stuff.
Right.
You're talking about tens of millions of dollars.
For him, it's probably, at this point, for him, it might be over. It's just whether the global settlement, whether he sells the ships or all the vessels or not. But now, as you mentioned, there's a lot of other stuff which affects the community in New Bedford and New England when in terms of Noah's. Well, I guess when Noah's civil action, that would affect him too. So I guess, yeah, it's still very much a lot to figure out.
Do you have a sense of whether those permits will stay here? And I'm not. Maybe it's deadly to predict.
I really don't. Yeah,
right.
That's the crazy thing is I really, really don't, and I'm not sure anyone does. If you had told me, if I had, and this is why I say that, if you had asked me a week before the sentencing what I thought, I would have said confidently that I would have thought that a global deal would have been done,
right.
And that then it wouldn't have mattered in anything. And that's about as confident as I've been in anything, and obviously that didn't happen.
Right.
So I don't really have any inclination of where the permits may land, which just shows that literally anything can happen because the one thing I thought I knew in this case didn't happen. So it's all over.
Do you have a sense of what the holdup is? Where the holdup is coming from? Is it Carlos? Is it his lawyers? Is it the government?
I think if you look at the documents and everything, it's the government and Noah because when you look, Carlos and the Canastros have agreed to a memorandum of agreement. So everything in the details is there. I think it just has to do with the government wanting to agree with it. The aspect that I think probably is generating the most haze among the government's kind of platform and hesitancy of doing this is I don't know, and again, I tried to reach out to a number of people and I couldn't really get a clarification on this, but my understanding is no bank is going to loan, well, no single bank is going to loan the Canastros $90 million. So at some point, the Raphael Trust is going to kind of put up some of that money. And I don't think Noah wants Carlos at all involved in that because if you have a bank, you own a house, if you don't make your payments on the house, who owns the house?
Right,
the bank.
Right.
So if the Canastros don't make payments, the trust then owns those boats and it goes back into Carlos's hands. My understanding is there's some agreement where that wouldn't happen, but again, I've tried to cross some T's and dot some I's to better understand that.
Right.
But my guess is that's what's kind of holding up the government side is if Carlos's trust is kind of funding some of this, that may prevent him from fully getting out of the business.
It's an incredible story. Did you think? Let me ask you a question. When you got here, what did you know about fishing?
Nothing. I didn't know who Carlos Raphael was.
No.
Yeah, I had no idea, and last week I'm out on the by his vessels watching government agents aboard the ships and
yeah, that's an interesting part of the story here. Tell people what happened for those who missed it in the paper.
So we were sitting in the newsroom, and we hear over the scanner that U.S. Marshals are here, and they're boarding the Southern Crusader II. And I'm like, well, that's one of Carlos's vessels, which just shows. I mean, that's if you said the Southern Crusader II 9 months ago, what is that? I have no idea.
Right.
So we head out to the docks, and I was at the Lady Patricia, and there were two federal agents.
And what's the Lady Patricia?
A vessel as well.
See, you're speaking like we all know this stuff, Michael.
Yeah.
No, we don't. You know all the names of the boats. We don't.
Crazy. Yeah, I was by the Lady Patricia, one of the four vessels mentioned by Judge Young to be forfeited.
Okay.
The others being the Olivia and Rafaela, the Bulldog, and the Southern Crusader II. And the Lady Patricia was behind the waterfront grill, basically, and the two other ships were behind, if you just basically directly behind the Fairfield Inn, so I had to drive around a little bit. But the two agents by the Lady Patricia were saying, we're here. We're just basically making sure that the vessels don't leave. That they're government property. They're here.
Because they own them
disappear. Right. And I'm getting there, and I'm just asking for any information because much like you were saying, what's the Lady Patricia? I'm like, do they take these by giant tractor trailers? Do they drive them away? Where do they get the keys? I literally don't know anything.
Right.
And then people are like, well, we can't tell you anything. I'm like, no, I'm not asking like for how does this, in general, like, how do you seize a vessel? How does this work? I'm not asking for this specific situation. Eventually, I went over and discovered that the Coast Guard Investigative Services is a thing. I didn't realize the CGIS was a thing. And he said, well, you know, the NCIS. I said, yeah. So this is the Coast Guard CI. Okay. IS. So, and we had an interesting conversation about there is a difference between the Coast Guard and the Coast Guard Investigative Service. He said, yeah. And I just initially said the Coast Guard, but he said, well, if NCIS was here, you wouldn't say the Navy was here. Right. And I said, well, fair point. So they were able to provide me a little bit more information on what was happening. They allowed the people to board the boats that had any personal belongings. Technically, they could seize everything in there. Okay. But the person I was speaking to said there's just no point for that. If people want to come get their stuff, which was paper towels, food, water. I spoke with someone later who said that they had just bought about $1,000 worth of groceries. Okay. And for a fishing trip.
Let me ask you a question: with the untaxed cigarettes, did they get those off the boat?
Do you know I didn't see any cigarettes, honestly.
Do you know they don't have to pay the tax?
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah,
I learned something. Yeah, I didn't know
that. I'll explain it more off the air to you.
I didn't see any cigarettes though. So
those guys got those cigarettes off the boat.
I was taking down what I was seeing. I didn't, but I did see baskets and trash bags, so that maybe they were.
And you had some pictures.
Yeah,
of just stuff on the sidewalk, and you said a lot of stuff just ended up in the garbage, right?
Some of it, but I think a lot of it, people, backed the pickup trucks. They just backed up pickup trucks and they just loaded it all in and not very, organized. Chuck as much as you can in the back and move on from there. So it was interesting in the, 2-3 minutes I've described it, but the 4 or 5 hours, there wasn't a whole lot going on, but there were some interesting minutes to speak, but a lot of it was just sitting around and agents talking on phones and me on my laptop writing a story.
Are the boats gone now?
My understanding, yes. They're not. I haven't actually been back, which is bad journalist on me. But some people have told me they're not there anymore, and the U.S. Marshal confirmed to us that they seized boats, and the DOJ did as well. So, but at an quote undisclosed location, and that's the other thing. Nobody knows what is going to use. One of the aspects you can do is auction them off, which is a lot of things that the U.S. Marshals do, but they don't know what they're going to do with these, according to the U.S. Marshals, and they also don't know what the money is going to go for. In fact, a lot of the public affairs person at the U.S. Marshals was asking me about the case, saying, like, really? Are there victims in this case? Because usually it goes to the victims. And I said, well, there are, but there aren't. You can make the argument that there are victims. Sure. The entire fishing community, the CLF said the fish themselves, or whatever they are, itself and themselves, are victims. So there's a lot to wade through in terms of...
And there's a lot of money involved.
Yeah.
So there'll be a lot of,
About $2 million.
Yeah. A lot of people are going to start trying to come forward to
right. And there's the aspect of Carlos's wife has interests in 3 of the vessels, and another person has interest in the Southern Crusader too, and there has to be a hearing at some point to decide those third-party interests, if they're valid or not. So it's still a long way to go. As much as the Marshals seizing the vessel seemed like a big, finish line, it really wasn't. It's just another step along the marathon.
We're going to take a quick break. We're talking with Mike Bonner from the Standard Times. We'll be right back.
14 WBSM Sunday Brunch.
And good morning. I'm Chris McCarthy. This is Sunday Brunch. We have Mike Bonner from the New Bedford Standard Times here in the studio with us. Let's transition over to the big election here in the city, the mayor's race. What have you learned so far about this, Mike? This is your first political season here in New Bedford.
Yeah.
You got to see a fight, right, at City Hall?
Yeah, I did.
Welcome to New Bedford.
An argument. Yeah, I didn't see the alleged punch or connection, but I did see the argument pre and post. So I've had a few warm-ups. We had the Ward 3 special.
That's right.
And then we had obviously the preliminary. But this is my first general election, and I think I think I've seen it all. But I guess we'll see in November if I really have seen it all.
There's got to be another. There's got to be some more things you haven't seen that'll happen. What's your sense of what people are thinking here in the city?
In terms of the mayor?
In terms of the mayor, in terms of what issues are really important to people. I know the candidates want to have people.
I think the two biggest issues are, you hear it repeatedly. I actually asked all of the ward counselors, candidate counselors, what they've been hearing when they knock on doors and campaign, and it's 1-2-2-1 crime and property taxes.
Okay.
Taxes and crime are the two biggest movers and shakers, I think, which is I find really interesting because as someone who covers City Hall and covers the mayor, it's two things that I don't know how much the mayor has control over at times in terms of
crime's a tough one.
Yeah, crime. You have the police and exactly crime. Certainly, property taxes obviously has more influence trying to get businesses but the budget, when you look at about 75%, is the state says this is what you got to do. There's not much, a whole lot on there. To me, I was walking my dog the other day, and I was trying to think, what would I try to do if I was, running and talking about taxes? And I think the one thing you try to do is you're going to pay taxes.
Absolutely.
So I think, as a CEO of the city of a company, you need to make sure that your customers are getting the most for their money. Right. So I think that's something where that's where crime maybe ties in. You're paying your taxes for a police department, a fire department, potholes or whatever. You got to make sure that money that your customers, so to speak, are getting the most for their taxes. And maybe that's what people are seeing right now is they're paying a lot of money, and I don't think they're happy with what their taxes are getting them.
The city of New Bedford is a very safe city. I know people call up and yell at me about that. But truthfully, there's some pockets in the city. But overall, it's a safe city. Unfortunately, we in the media, and the mayor's got this right, but everybody in politics complains about this to some point. If it bleeds, it leads. So we're running crime stories all the time. You guys run crime stories. I mean, it's just part of the business.
Right.
So it gives an exaggerated sense sometimes. And I don't know what a mayor would do, for instance. Look, if you got gangs, that's something the police can try to knock down. But if you have someone kills someone, it's almost impossible to stop that, right? I mean, you don't have a police officer on every single street corner.
Right. I think I find the interesting aspect of this, and we were talking about, story ideas and such in the paper, and I thought it's not a razzle-dazzle type of feature or package, but I thought crime would be really interesting because it's not the police officers, it's not the mayor, it's not the courts, it's all of them. It's not the DA. Like, you have the police investigating and apprehending someone, then the courts, whether they
let them go
or they don't. There's a lot of aspects, and you mentioned the gang. Well, how does someone join a gang?
Right.
It's there isn't unfortunately a switch to flip that will solve crime. And then even the definition of what is crime, up or down. And I said, do you say that if everything's down but homicides, does that mean crime's down? Or if everything is up but homicides, does that mean crime is up? It's really interesting when there's so many layers to it rather than just a 5-letter crime. There are so many facets and layers, I think, and rarely when you write those day-to-day crime stories can you get into how do you solve crime? How do you solve gangs? How do you solve the opioids? They all go into this umbrella of crime, small little word, everyone says it's up, it's down, there's an argument over, but I feel like in arguing it, you really don't get to the how do you solve it? Just saying it's up, saying it's down isn't going to do anything. More police officers may not do anything. There's a lot more layers to that.
And you also, like any municipality, it's an ongoing thing. I mean, if you open the newspaper from the 1940s, which I happen to have some copies of, the 1940 Standard Times, there's stories about crime in there. I mean, it's an ongoing management issue. It's constant. It's a constant thing. But I think, New Bedford gets – it's funny. I've had people from this year, the mayor in particular, up to Boston, and people who I work with up in the Boston radio market say, I can't believe what all kinds of great things are going on in New Bedford. I mean, the city of New Bedford has a tremendous amount of great things going on in it. And unfortunately, sometimes the crime, gets ahead. But it's all well and good. But if you live in a neighborhood, if you live in a neighborhood that has a crime problem, it doesn't matter what the statistics say, right?
Right, and I think that's what Charlie Perry has said, and that's what John Mitchell has more recently said, that if you look at the statistics, overall crime is down, but in specific neighborhoods, it may not have gone down at all. It may have risen, it may have stayed the same, which is that's the interesting thing about stats and everything. You say 80% of people so and so this, or 99% of people this and that. Right. But if you're that 1% person, you don't care what it's affecting you. And I think that's when you look at the crime stats, it really can affect you, because if it's affecting you, then it's the biggest point in your life.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us, Mike Bonner. Check out his article in the Standard Times. Speaking of crime, up next we'll have Sheriff Hodgson. We'll take a quick break and we'll be back.